Spotlight is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It seeks to spotlight people, places, and events from around the Diocese of Youngstown that promote the new gospel of joy called for by Pope Francis. Your program host is Father James Korda.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Korda. During this series, we're going to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. And joining me now in today's show is Father Jeff Mickler. Welcome to Spotlight.
Delighted to be here.
You know, whenever we talk about anniversaries, I think it's important for us to remember what anniversaries are all about and why we celebrate those. And I think especially as an institution like the Church, it's important for us to mark those milestones. In your own life, why are anniversaries important?
Well, actually, spiritually, it starts with Jesus when he initiated the Eucharist. He said, do this in remembrance of me. And so we're always celebrating that Last Supper in all of our current celebrations of the Eucharist. Now, anniversaries are important because we could reminisce about the good we've done in the past and give thanks for all the graces and love we've received in the course of a lifetime.
You know, as we're talking about the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown, we also celebrate those who have been part of the diocese from the beginning. And I know the Society of St. Paul, of which you obviously are a member, were invited into the Diocese of Youngstown. Let's talk about those early beginnings back around 1943 and subsequent years of the involvement of the Society of St. Paul here in Youngstown.
Well, we arrived 1 year later in 1944, and it was sort of a miraculous sequence of events. Father Francis Burano had helped out the Diocese of Cleveland, where there were a couple parishes that were predominantly Italian that had been temporarily suspended, and when they restarted them up, they knew Father Burano was a famous Italian priest in New York. He came and preached a mission at each one, establishing a reputation, a positive reputation in Cleveland. So, in the Society of St. Paul, we had a crisis moment. We needed a new house somewhere other than New York for our novitiate. Wrote to every diocese in the nation. None of them wanted us because communications, what's that? We know about hospital work, we know about teaching work, we know about helping the poor, but communications, we don't need a publisher here. And that led to a moment when Bishop McFadden arrived in Staten Island just to pay his regards to Father Burano and said, when are you coming to my new diocese? And it was like heaven sent. And we said tomorrow if possible.
Yeah. Well, tell us how many would have come and how did that all start and why were you looking for a novitiate outside of Staten Island?
It was canon law. You couldn't have your novitiate in the same place you had your other stages of formation. And ideally, the novitiate should be more rural than urban for the sake of the development of the novices. And that was the critical point because we had a lot of people in formation and how to get them to the next step. Now, the Ursuline sisters owned this property in Ellsworth, where we're now located. Bishop McFadden wisely wanted to move them closer into town. So he said, why don't you buy the Ursuline property, move there, and I'll move the sisters to where they now are on Shields Road. And so it benefited both the diocese and us. Now, when we got here, it was a working farm, and we continued to work that farm in 1944 because it was the main source of income.
Sure.
And also we were sending food to Staten Island because remember, in the World War II, there was all types of shortages. So we were making trips filled with produce back to our brothers there in Staten Island. But the main thing was to start up in novitiate. And there was probably 10 or 12 young men that started the novitiate, some faculty members, priests and brothers to come out here to assist them in this endeavor.
You know, it's interesting in our last few minutes of our time together, talking about the height of all of this, because obviously in the beginning, Bishop McFadden had to start from scratch in a sense. So there was lots of building, there was lots of growth. And how did the Society of St. Paul add to that growth, and how were they as a society and community growing as well?
Well, he actually gave us the name St. Paul Monastery because he liked the sound of it. We're not monks, but we brought our apostolate here, so we began publishing pamphlets. We started Pastoral Life magazine in 1953 that went out to thousands of priests across the nation. Catholic Home Messenger was here, which at its peak had a circulation of 150,000. And in the 1960s, we began the audiovisual department in earnest, and we had Audio Theology Digest. We had all the best speakers in the world on our list. And so we were reaching out from Ellsworth to the nation and to the world. And we were always in harmony with the diocese here and benefiting from our diocesan associations with both the clergy and the other religious communities that were in this area.
In our closing of our first segment, talk briefly about your founder and the charism.
Blessed Alberione founded the Society of St. Paul in 1914 to work in social communications, his exact term. And he knew that there was already an explosion in media started then, radio, the press, and he knew other things were coming up, cinema, and he said whatever else human ingenuity comes up with. And at one point, a crazy idea that popped into his mind, he said, you know, one day people might get their newspapers over their telephone lines. And so that's somehow divine inspiration entering in. And he actually visited our property here on 2 occasions and met Bishop McFadden.
So that would have been obviously significant not only for the Diocese of Youngstown, but also for the Society of St. Paul, that communion, if you will, of charisms with your community and the diocesan church. We're going to take a break in a moment, and what we'd like the folks that are with us to do is to remember that as we gather in this space, that we're going to talk a little bit about what this building was actually used for and how we have really used it now for the benefit of communications, not only here locally, but also across the country. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. It was in Dungannon, Ohio, in Columbiana County, that the first group of Catholics settled. St. Philip Neri, the first parish in all northern Ohio, was founded in 1817 under the title of St. Paul's Settlement. It was to visit this settlement that Father Edward Fenwick, the Apostle of Ohio, made his first trip to northern Ohio. 4 years later, Cincinnati was chosen as a see city in the state of Ohio, and Fenwick was selected as the first bishop. Today, St. Philip Neri remains the oldest parish in the Diocese of Youngstown, but it is also one of the smallest. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. Miles from the first Catholic parish in all of Ohio, in a place called Canton, Catholics gathered in 1817 to celebrate Mass with Father Fenwick. Because of limited building space, the Mass was held outdoors under a huge oak tree. The spot near the present Church of St. John the Baptist, which was established in 1823 as the second oldest parish in the Diocese of Youngstown. The oak tree grew there until 1906, when it was struck by lightning. To preserve it, the parishioners took the wood and carved a chair out of it, which remains in the church today. In 2012, St. John the Baptist was elevated to a basilica. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with Father Jeff Mickler of the Society of St. Paul. You know, this building that we are actually in right now in our studios is just a small part of the Society of St. Paul Monastery. So tell us a little bit about the buildings that we are in, but also how that came about in the creation of your presence here in the Diocese of Youngstown.
Well, we're currently at this very spot in the novitiate and college library because we had 2 years of philosophy as well as theology taught here. After the clerics finished their philosophy, they went to Rome to study. But we also early on had built a sound studio, which we're also using right now as part of the production part of CTNY. And that was put together with the skills of Father Francis Perella, who was a very good carpenter. And as we expand from this spot, we'd see that there were numerous classrooms, which has the CTNY offices currently. We have a dining room, laundry room, and then rooms for the novices, students, and the faculty. So this turned out to be quite a big building. It's actually 100 yards long, which shows the size and scope of it. And then we have a beautiful chapel, which captures our spirituality with St. Paul and our other devotions.
And let's talk about some of the things that actually happen within that chapel and within this space where we do productions together that celebrate your charism and also continue to communicate the good news of Jesus Christ.
In many ways, this chapel here is unique in the Society of St. Paul and the world. We're in over 30 countries. But it's in this chapel where our spirituality and our apostolate converge. Because part of our spirituality in the Society of St. Paul is to make an hour Eucharistic visit a day, as well as celebrating the Eucharist on a daily basis. And so we have set up a television space for the sacred there that over the decades has reached not only thousands of people locally, but also nationally through being reposted on the internet. I've had responses from New Zealand to Siberia, and it's such an important dynamic of our lives, both our spirituality and our apostolate. Let's
kind of move from here into the life of something that really affects all of us, and that is parish life. I know that over the years that the priests were involved with some parishes here in the Diocese of Youngstown and continue to be in many ways. So let's talk about how the Society of St. Paul is involved in the life of the diocesan church, especially in parishes.
Every religious congregation, in a sense, is there to supplement the parishes, to give graces to the parishes, to support people in their community life in the parish. From the very beginning, Blessed Alberione told our priests, go out and celebrate Mass wherever you're invited, but always remember where your home is, of course. Now, locally, I and Father Matthew both were privileged to be the canonical pastor of St. Anne's in Sebring, a great experience for us. But because of our connection with the diocesan priest, our magazine, primarily for diocesan priests, Pastoral Life, was greatly enriched. And that went out at its peak to 7,000 priests across the country, helping them in their parish life. And so it was a mutual enrichment. The more we learn from the diocesan priest, the more we could share with the diocesan priest.
Now, is the presence of the Society of St. Paul in the States and around the world also present in parish life as well?
It pretty much is, but again, with the priests being primarily housed in our community and reaching out to supplement, and this is so important today with the scarcity of diocesan priests, to help out in the parishes in any way we can. Whenever, say, there's a diocesan convocation where all the priests get together to meet, well, the religious priests of the diocese were on call in case there's an emergency, and generally there is during that week for funerals or for anointing of the sick, etc. And we're delighted to do that.
Let's talk about the larger family of the Society of St. Paul. It's more than just the priests and the brothers. Mm-hmm. So talk about that structure.
Well, we have about 10 groups, too detailed to get into at this point, but we have consecrated lay women, consecrated lay men. We have the Daughters of St. Paul, who are in 50 countries working in communications. We have the Disciples of the Divine Master, who are more contemplative, and they support us by their prayers, their liturgical arts, and also service to the clergy. In Boston, they staff the retirement home for the clergy there in that great diocese. And so all of these units try to work together and in harmony for the greater glory of the Church and God.
In our last few minutes of our middle segment, talk about how communications has changed for the Society of St. Paul over these years since its founding by Blessed James of Barione.
Well, we're experiencing the same challenge that all of publishing is. It's all in disarray. Newsweek magazine has disappeared. The traditional book publishers are all struggling. And that's because you get so much free information over the internet, although it's not really free. And we're making adjustments there. We're using the internet where we now have audible books. We also have e-books. We're reaching out in different formats, but it's a very, very difficult challenge and a great opportunity at the same time. So many of the national magazines have disappeared. The great newspapers are all being supplemented, like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And so Catholic publications have this particular challenge. We're lucky we have a pretty good diocesan newspaper in the Catholic Exponent here that keeps people informed on what's going on in the local diocese, but it's a big challenge in publishing and in our particular ministry.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that and how important communication is, not only in the Society of St. Paul and here at CTNY, but also in the church. But we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. The first Catholic parish established in Portage County in 1831 near Randolph-Suffield was St. Joseph Church. Years later, John Newman, who would become the first American male to be canonized, was sent there to give a mission to help heal the divisions that occurred between the German Catholics who had settled there. Perhaps that is what made him a saint. The parish is also noted for its school, which dates back to 1832, being the oldest English-speaking school west of the Alleghenies. The church is also famous for its Lourdes Shrine, which has welcomed pilgrims since 1927 and is the only exact replica of the world-famous grotto at Lourdes in France. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. After the Catholics of Warren stopped meeting in their homes and organized a structured parish, they used a former Episcopalian church for their worship. St. Mary's Mission was established in 1837, yet the first resident pastor did not come to the parish until 1868. Other parishes quickly grew up in Trumbull County, including St. Stephen Niles in 1853, St. Patrick Hubbard in 1869, St. Vincent de Paul Vienna in 1871, now called St. Thomas the Apostle, and St. Rose Gerard in 1892. The other 15 parishes in the county were established after the turn of the 20th century. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future.
33 million Americans have descended into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.
Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with member of the Society of St. Paul, Father Jeff Mickler. You know, before we kind of end our show, we want to talk about your recollections of some of our diocesan leaders that you were able to minister with and to have some experience with. And I think probably the first one would have been Bishop Malone. Mm-hmm. So in your experience, what were some of the things you remember about him in your working?
Well, he was the one that ordained me. He was very influential, twice the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, and the one that started CTNY here at our location. We were delighted to work with him on that project. And of course, Father Bob Bono was early on someone who saw the incredible importance of this mission. From 1944, when no bishops thought communications was at all interesting or important till now, there has been an enormous sea change. And I would say every diocese and every bishop is aware of its importance.
Mm-hmm. And I think also bishops subsequent to Bishop Malone have understood the importance of communications, telecommunications, radio, television, the print, and now we're so involved in social media, and I know you yourself personally are very involved in that. Talk a little bit about social media and how we can best use it for the church's advantage.
Well, there are so many aspects to that. Social media, though, requires immediate responses and interactions to build up a following and also to have your own, you might say, virtual parish online. And I find that I'm always a little behind the curve. I'm starting to be a little slower as I enter into my mid-70s, etc. But that's where we need to invite also the laity to participate in social media for the sake of the church. And there are so many opportunities, so many challenges that it can't even begin in a short segment like that to flush them all out.
You know, how could we understand the importance of the media? You know, sometimes in today's world, sometimes the media gets not really a fair shake, but how important is it for us to understand the great power of those tools, but how do we use them for the betterment of people and for the church?
It not only saves souls, it saves lives. People who are in this diocese, handicapped, homebound, the masses we produce here are like lifelines to them. I've had responses over the internet where people really have stepped back from the brink of suicide because of the messages they've received through our mutual work here. And people have gotten help because of that with addictions and many other problems that are really life-changing and potentially earth-shattering if they had not gotten help there through the social media. Meanwhile, the enemy camp is propagating all types of false values, leading to despair and depression. We're in the other direction.
Sure. We would be remiss if we did not talk about Alba House and St. Paul's Books and Gifts. So let's talk briefly about the beginning of Alba House and how it kind of morphed into St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts.
Well, Alba House was our initial big publishing logo in Staten Island. At our peak, we had 3 bookstores, one in the Southern Park Mall, one in the Eastwood Mall, and one here on our property. And we ministered through those stores for like 30 years. But eventually, markets changed. We had always subsidized those stores, but it became too much. So we had to find a new way to have a local presence. So we closed the mall stores, closed our little gift shop out here in Ellsworth, and opened one really at the center of local commerce in Boardman. And that was under the leadership of Father Tony Baptista in so many ways. He's dynamic bookstore type of person, and it continues to be a great blessing, I think, for the local people.
You know, we also remember the store at Belden Village in Canton.
Yes.
Very popular there too. And of course, here at CTNY, we still get calls from people around the diocese as to where they can find Alba House or St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts. What are some of the things that people can find at the bookstore in Boardman?
Well, there's the religious articles which give us spiritual backbone, whether it's rosary, medals, etc. But then there's also books that give us intellectual food that helps open our minds to the wisdom of the church in a world that's filled with so much foolishness, and to inspire us, say, by the lives of the saints. You read the life of some great saint like St. Anthony, and then you become devoted to the person. It changes your whole outlook on what is really real and truly important.
We know our diocesan logo for this 75th anniversary is pride in the past and faith in the future. How has the Society of St. Paul celebrated that past, and what do you look forward to in the future?
Well, we have individual celebrations and anniversaries, and we try to commemorate historic moments in our journey with the people of God. The future is one that is filled with hope, not because of our human resources, but because we have the ultimate resource, God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And in the community of the church, this is where we find a hope that sustains us all.
And what would, if folks would like to get a hold of St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts, how do they do that? Where are you located? What would be the best way to contact you?
Well, through the internet, you could find us listed there, but also there's so many ways to do it. If you went to stpauls.us, stpauls.us, you find a great listing of all of our products and also our locations there that they can find us, both in the New York area and here. And it's helpful to go that way because you might save yourself a trip to the store. Oh, there's the book I'm looking for. And at the same time, you'll get the contact information, the phone numbers, and be able to find directions, etc.
Well, Father Jeff Mickler, as always, your presence on our show today, but also on past shows, have been very special, and we appreciate your insight, your input, but we most especially appreciate the presence of the Society of St. Paul for many years here in the Diocese of Youngstown. We hope that that will continue well into the future. Okay. And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Spotlight has been a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Korda.